They're going to hang an innocent man in 3 days, and the only person who can save him is his 12-year-old son. The rope waits like a patient serpent, coiled and ready in the courthouse square, while three sunrises stand between Thomas McReady and the gallows that bear his name. His boy Samuel, 12 years old and hollow-eyed as a winter sparrow, presses his face against the jailhouse bars and watches dust motes dance in the failing light. The town of Millbrook has already carved the verdict into its collective memory. Guilty of murder, guilty of blood spilled in the saloon on a Tuesday night when the world seemed smaller and justice wore a simpler face. But Samuel knows what the 12 men in the jury box could not see, what the prosecutor's voice could not drown, what even his father's silence could not bury. The truth moves through him like a fever, burning and restless, demanding witness. 3 days stretch before him like an eternity measured in heartbeats. Each tick of the courthouse clock a countdown to the moment when Millbrook will gather, to watch a man swing for a crime that lives in the shadows of someone else's conscience. The sheriff, a weathered man named Hawkins whose hands have grown steady from years of holding difficult truths, unlocks the cell door with the reverence of a man opening a tomb. Thomas McReady sits on the narrow cot, his shoulders carved from stone, his eyes fixed on some distant horizon visible only to him. The resemblance between father and son strikes Samuel like lightning, the same stubborn jaw, the same way of holding silence like a shield, the same hands that speak in gestures when words fail. Samuel slips through the cell door and settles beside his father, the weight of unspoken words settling between them like dust after a windstorm. The jail smells of rust and regret, of men who have counted their remaining hours on fingers that shake with the arithmetic of mortality. Through the barred window, Millbrook continues its evening rituals, lamps flickering to life in windows, horses stamping at hitching posts, the distant sound of a child's laughter cutting through the air like a blade. His father's voice, when it comes, carries the texture of gravel and grief. "You shouldn't be here, boy. This place ain't meant for young eyes. Neither is watching them hang you for something you didn't do." Samuel's words hang in the air between them, truth and accusation woven together like rope. "Tell me about that night, Pa. Tell me what really happened." Thomas turns his gaze from the window to his son, and in that moment Samuel sees not the man the town believes him to be, but the father who taught him to whittle, who showed him how to read the sky for weather, who carried him home on broad shoulders when the world grew too large for small legs. The silence stretches between them, heavy with the weight of things that cannot be unsaid, truths that cannot be unfelt. "Your mother," Thomas begins, then stops, the words catching in his throat like thorns. "She used to say that some secrets are too heavy for one person to carry alone. But this secret, Samuel, this one might be too heavy for a boy to carry at all." Samuel reaches into his pocket and withdraws a small wooden horse, carved with a careful patience that only a father's hands can master. The wood bears the marks of countless evenings spent by lamplight, father and son working together in comfortable silence, shaping something beautiful from something raw. "You made this for me when I was 8. Remember what you told me? You said that sometimes the most important things are the ones we can't see at first. You said the horse was already there in the wood, and we just had to find it." The carved horse catches the fading light, its surface worn smooth by small hands and pocket journeys. Thomas reaches out and touches the wooden mane with a finger that trembles slightly, and Samuel sees in that gesture the weight of every bedtime story, every morning blessing, every moment of love that has passed between them like water through cupped hands. "That night in the saloon," Thomas says finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wasn't alone. Marcus Webb was there, drunk and mean as a snake in summer. He'd been talking about your mother again, saying things that no man should say about another man's wife, especially not about a woman who can't defend herself no more." The words spill from Thomas like blood from a wound, each sentence carrying the weight of months of silence. Samuel listens with the intensity of a boy who understands that some stories can only be told once, that some truths burn brightest in the moment before they're shared. Outside, the courthouse clock chimes the hour, marking time like a funeral bell. "Webb drew first," Thomas continues, his eyes now fixed on his hands, studying the lines and calluses as if they might hold answers to questions he's afraid to ask. "But his shot went wide, caught poor Henry Morrison in the chest instead. Morrison fell, and Webb just stood there for a moment, like he couldn't believe what he'd done. Then he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I've seen before. Fear. The kind of fear that makes a man do terrible things to save himself. Samuel feels the truth settling into his bones like winter cold, bringing with it the understanding that the world is larger and more complicated than a 12-year-old boy should have to comprehend. The carved horse grows warm in his palm, and he thinks of his father's hands shaping it from rough wood, patient and careful, revealing what was always meant to be. He put the gun in my hand, Thomas says, his voice growing steadier now, as if the telling itself brings relief. Said he'd tell everyone I shot Morrison in self-defense if I'd take the blame. Said he had evidence that would hang me anyway. Letters your mother wrote him before she died. Letters that would make it look like there was something between them that never was. The cell grows quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Father and son sharing the weight of a truth that changes everything and nothing. Samuel understands now why his father chose silence, why he sits in this cage waiting for a rope, rather than speaking words that would destroy the memory of a woman who loved them both with the fierce tenderness of mountain storms. Where are the letters, Pa? Webb burned them the next morning. Made sure I watched from this very window. Samuel stands and walks to the barred opening, looking out at Millbrook as it settles into evening. Somewhere in this town, Marcus Webb sleeps in his own bed, dreams his own dreams, wakes to mornings that stretch ahead of him like an endless prairie. Somewhere in this town, the truth waits to be found, patient as water wearing down stone. The next morning arrives with the weight of destiny pressing down on Samuel's shoulders, like his father's coat. Too large and too heavy, but necessary nonetheless. He moves through Millbrook streets with the purpose of a boy who has aged a lifetime in a single night, his eyes sharp and watchful, his ears tuned to the frequency of secrets. The town carries on its business with the casual cruelty of ordinary life. Merchants opening shops, children playing in the dust, women hanging laundry like prayer flags in the morning breeze. Samuel makes his way to the saloon where it all began, where Henry Morrison's blood still stains the floorboards despite repeated scrubbing. The bartender, a man named Coleman with sad eyes and steady hands, wipes glasses with the methodical patience of someone who has seen too much and forgotten too little. The saloon smells of whiskey and regret, of conversations that should never have been spoken and silences that should never have been kept. "You're McReady's boy," Coleman says without looking up from his glasses. It's not a question but a recognition, the way one identifies a storm by the taste of the air. "Yes, sir." Coleman sets down his cloth and looks at Samuel with eyes that hold the accumulated weight of 1,000 nights spent listening to men confess their sins to whiskey bottles. "Your father's a good man, quiet, respectful, never caused trouble before that night. What about Marcus Webb?" Something shifts in Coleman's expression, a cloud passing over the sun. He picks up another glass, holds it to the light, examines it for spots that might not be there. "Webb's trouble. Has been since he came to town. But he's got money, and money talks louder than character in most places." Samuel waits, understanding instinctively that silence can be a tool, that sometimes the most important words come in the spaces between questions. Coleman continues wiping glasses, but his movements have grown more deliberate, as if he's cleaning away more than dust and fingerprints. "The night Morrison died," Coleman says finally, "Webb was here from sundown till it happened. Drinking hard, talking harder, kept going on about some woman, how she'd wronged him, how he'd make her pay, even if she was dead and buried." The words strike Samuel like hail, sharp and sudden. Did he mention her name? Coleman meets Samuel's eyes for the first time, and in that gaze, Samuel sees something that looks like hope struggling against resignation. Elizabeth. He kept saying Elizabeth like it was a curse word. Samuel's mother. The woman who lives now only in his father's careful silences and in the way Thomas sometimes stares at empty chairs as if expecting them to be filled. The woman whose letters Webb claimed as evidence, whose memory became a weapon pointed at her husband's heart. "There's something else," Coleman continues, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely carries over the sound of the ceiling fan's lazy rotation. "After the shooting, when everyone was running around like chickens with their heads cut off, I saw Webb slip something into Morrison's coat pocket. Thought it was strange then, think it's stranger now. Samuel feels his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. Did you tell the sheriff? Webb's got the sheriff's ear. Has ever since he helped finance the new schoolhouse. My word against his. Coleman shrugs, the gesture carrying the weight of a man who has learned the hard mathematics of power and influence. Samuel thinks of Morrison, buried now in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Millbrook, taking whatever secrets Webb planted on him into the earth. The afternoon sun slants through the saloon's dusty windows, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. And Samuel understands that some truths are buried not because they're dead, but because they're too dangerous to let live. He leaves the saloon with Coleman's words echoing in his mind like church bells. Each revelation, another piece of a puzzle that grows clearer and more terrible with each connection. The cemetery calls to him with the gravitational pull of unfinished business, and Samuel finds himself walking the dusty road that leads up the hill where Millbrook keeps its dead. The graveyard stretches across the hilltop like a stone garden, weathered headstones marking the places where stories ended and memories began. Samuel finds Morrison's grave easily, the earth still mounded and dark, the wooden marker simple and spare. Henry Morrison, it reads, beloved father and friend. The dates carved below bracket a life that ended too soon, cut short by a bullet meant for someone else's conscience. Samuel kneels beside the grave, his hands moving of their own accord to brush away the leaves that have gathered against the marker. The cemetery holds its breath around him, patient and watchful, as if the dead themselves are waiting to see what the living will do with the truth they've been given. The sound of approaching footsteps on gravel makes Samuel look up, and he sees Marcus Webb walking toward him with the measured pace of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. Webb is older than Samuel's father, his face weathered by years of squinting into sun and wind, his clothes expensive but practical. There's something in his eyes that reminds Samuel of a wolf circling a wounded deer, patient, calculating, certain of the eventual outcome. Shouldn't be up here alone, boy, Webb says, his voice carrying the false warmth of a man accustomed to getting his way through charm and intimidation. Graveyards can be dangerous places for those who don't know their way around. Samuel stands, his hand instinctively moving to the carved horse in his pocket. The wood feels warm against his palm, a talisman carved by his father's love and polished by his own need for courage. Just paying respects to Mr. Morrison. Good boy. Respect for the dead is important. Webb's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Your father taught you that, I suppose, before he killed poor Henry. The words hang in the air like smoke, and Samuel feels the weight of Webb's gaze pressing down on him like a physical thing. But something in the man's manner, some slight tremor in his voice, tells Samuel that Webb is not as certain as he pretends to be. Fear, his father had said. The kind of fear that makes a man do terrible things to save himself. My father didn't kill Mr. Morrison, Samuel says, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. But you already know that. Webb's expression shifts, the mask of false concern slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. Careful, boy. Grief can make people say things they don't mean, think things that ain't true. Samuel takes a step closer to Morrison's grave, positioning himself so that the mounded earth lies between him and Webb. Mr. Coleman saw you put something in Mr. Morrison's pocket after the shooting. What was it? The question strikes Webb like a physical blow, and Samuel sees the truth written across the man's face in lines of surprise and calculation. For a moment, the cemetery grows so quiet that Samuel can hear his own pulse drumming in his ears, can hear the whisper of wind through the grass that grows between the graves. Coleman's an old drunk, Webb says finally, but his voice carries a note of uncertainty that wasn't there before. Sees things that ain't there, remembers things that never happened. Then you won't mind if we dig up Mr. Morrison and see what's in his pockets. Webb's hand moves instinctively toward his gun, then stops as he realizes what such a gesture would reveal. The moment stretches between them like a taut wire, heavy with unspoken threats and barely contained violence. Samuel stands his ground, drawing strength from the carved horse and from the memory of his father's hands, shaping something beautiful from something raw. You think you're clever, Webb says, his voice now stripped of all pretense. But cleverness won't save your father. Tomorrow morning, he hangs. Nothing you can do or say will change that. Samuel watches Webb walk away, his footsteps echoing among the headstones like the measured beat of a funeral drum. When the man disappears over the hill's crest, Samuel turns back to Morrison's grave and kneels once more in the dark earth. The truth lies buried here, hidden in the pocket of a dead man, waiting for hands brave enough to disturb the sleep of the innocent. The final night settles over Millbrook like a shroud, heavy with the weight of approaching dawn and the terrible arithmetic of justice. Samuel sits in the jailhouse with his father, the two of them sharing silence that feels more complete than words. The carved horse passes between their hands like a prayer, smooth wood carrying the accumulated warmth of love and memory and desperate hope. Outside, the gallows stands ready in the courthouse square, its beams silhouetted against stars that seem smaller and more distant than they did just 3 days ago. The rope waits with the patience of an executioner, coiled and certain, unmarked by doubt or mercy. Millbrook sleeps fitfully, troubled by dreams of justice and the uneasy knowledge that morning will bring either resolution or regret. Samuel has made his choice. In the deepest hour of night, when the town lies wrapped in darkness and the guards doze at their posts, he slips from the jailhouse like a shadow given form and purpose. The cemetery calls to him across the sleeping town, and he answers with the determination of a boy who has learned that sometimes love requires more courage than wisdom, more faith than certainty. The tools wait where he left them, borrowed from the undertaker's shed with the silent permission of a man who understands that some secrets must be unearthed before they can be properly buried. Samuel works in the darkness with the careful intensity of someone performing a sacred ritual, his hands moving earth that covers truth like snow covers spring grass. The casket, when he reaches it, seems smaller than he expected, as if death has compressed Henry Morrison into something more essential than life allowed. Samuel's hands shake as he lifts the lid, and he whispers an apology to the darkness for disturbing sleep that should be eternal, rest that should be peaceful. Morrison lies as the undertaker left him, hands folded across his chest, face composed in the artificial serenity of the embalmed dead. Samuel searches the coat pockets with fingers that tremble, not with cold, but with the weight of what he might find. The first pocket yields nothing but lint and the faint smell of tobacco. The second contains a piece of paper, folded small and hidden deep, waiting through months of burial to speak its truth to the living world. Samuel unfolds the paper by starlight, his eyes straining to make sense of the words written in handwriting he doesn't recognize. It's a letter, brief and to the point, dated the day before Morrison died. The signature at the bottom makes Samuel's blood turn to ice water in his veins. Marcus Webb. The letter is a confession, written in the desperate script of a man who expects to die, who wants the truth recorded somewhere safe before fear and alcohol and the terrible momentum of violence carry him past the point of redemption. Webb had planned to plant the letter on Morrison's body, Samuel realizes, evidence that would frame his father while providing Webb with the perfect alibi. But something had gone wrong, some detail overlooked in the chaos of gunfire and death. Samuel reads the words again by starlight, each sentence a key that unlocks the cage his father has built from silence and sacrifice. Webb confesses to the murder, admits to planting the gun in Thomas McReady's hand, reveals the elaborate deception designed to protect his own neck while destroying an innocent man's life. The letter even mentions the threats against Elizabeth McReady's memory, the lies Webb had prepared to tell if his first plan failed. Dawn comes to Millbrook like Judgment Day, pale and inexorable, carrying with it the sound of hammers as workmen make final preparations for the execution. Samuel runs through streets that seem both familiar and strange, the letter clutched in his hand like a weapon forged from truth and desperation. The courthouse square fills slowly with people drawn by the terrible magnetism of public death, their faces marked by the complex mixture of righteousness and shame that accompanies sanctioned killing. Sheriff Hawkins stands on the courthouse steps, his face gray with the weight of duties that sit heavy on his conscience. Samuel pushes through the gathering crowd, holding the letter above his head like a battle flag, his voice cutting through the morning air with the clarity of absolute conviction. Sheriff Hawkins, I have evidence. Evidence that proves my father's innocence. The crowd turns towards Samuel with the slow, surprised movement of people awakening from a dream they thought was real. Hawkins descends the courthouse steps with the careful deliberation of a man who has learned to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. Samuel presses the letter into the sheriff's weathered hands, watching as the man's eyes move across Webb's confession with growing understanding and gathering rage. Marcus Webb stands at the edge of the crowd, his face a mask of calculated calm that doesn't quite hide the fear moving beneath the surface like water under ice. Samuel watches him with the intensity of a hunter tracking wounded prey, seeing in Webb's posture the telltale signs of a man whose carefully constructed world is collapsing around him like a house built on sand. "This letter," Hawkins says, his voice carrying across the square, with the authority of truth finally spoken, "contains a full confession to the murder of Henry Morrison, signed by Marcus Webb and dated the night Morrison died." The crowd murmurs with the sound of 100 conversations starting at once, voices rising and falling like wind through wheat. Webb tries to disappear into the mass of people, but Samuel's pointing finger follows him like an arrow, and the crowd turns toward him with the inexorable momentum of justice finally finding its proper target. "It's a forgery!" Webb shouts, his voice cracking with desperation. "The boy's trying to save his father with lies and fabrication." But the letter speaks with the voice of truth, and truth has a weight that no amount of money or influence can lift. Hawkins reads portions of the confession aloud, each word falling on the crowd like drops of rain on drought-stricken earth. Webb's attempt to flee ends quickly, strong hands reaching out to hold him until proper shackles can be found. The gallows that had waited so patiently for Thomas McReady stands empty now, its rope coiled and unused, its terrible purpose transformed into something else entirely. Samuel watches his father walk free from the jailhouse, blinking in sunlight that seems brighter and more forgiving than it had just hours before. They walk together through streets that feel different now, familiar yet somehow transformed by the weight of truth finally spoken and justice finally served. The carved horse passes between their hands once more, smooth wood carrying new meaning, new hope, new understanding of what it means to fight for love when love seems lost. That evening, as Millbrook settles into a kind of peace it hasn't known for months, Samuel sits with his father on the porch of their small house on the edge of town. The sunset paints the sky in shades of forgiveness, and the wind carries the sound of children playing in streets where fear no longer walks like a hungry ghost. "Your mother would be proud," Thomas says, his voice soft with gratitude and grief, and the complex emotions of a man who has been given back his life when he had already begun to make peace with losing it. Samuel leans against his father's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of breathing that speaks of tomorrow stretching ahead like an endless trail. The carved horse rests in his pocket, warm and familiar, a talisman shaped by love and tested by courage and proven stronger than the lies that had tried to destroy them. In the distance, the courthouse clock chimes the hour, marking time not as a countdown to death, but as a measure of life continuing, flowing forward like a river that has finally found its proper course. The rope waits no longer, coiled now in storage, patient as hope itself for the day when justice and truth walk hand in hand through streets made clean by courage and sanctified by love. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.